Dream Vision 7 Radio Network welcomes Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, heard every Monday at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Using nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife evidence, quantum physics, consciousness research, and ancient writings, we seek to understand who and what we are, how reality works, the nature of God, and the meaning and purpose of our lives. Join Roberta weekly to better understand our one reality and gain insights into how we can make the most of the glorious eternal beings that we are.
Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm delighted you could be with us today. You know, the biggest scientific discovery of the 20th century was made almost a century ago by one of the finest physicists of all time. But as of today, the entire mainstream scientific community still ignores his discovery. All the varied evidence developed in the past century, including a lot of scientific evidence, indicates that he was right. But still, the mainstream scientific community basically keeps its fingers in its ears, its eyes scrunched tight, and it hums louder and louder as it tries harder and harder to drown out the truth. Why on earth would scientists ever behave this way? Well, the answer to that is simple. What this physicist had discovered was the fact that consciousness underlies everything. The first reaction to this new discovery by the scientific gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers, of course, are the university departments and the peer-reviewed journals, their first reaction was to establish what they called the fundamental scientific dogma of materialism. Close to 100 years ago, mainstream science actually turned itself into the religion of atheism, and they still prefer to follow what is ever more certainly being shown to be a completely false set of beliefs, just like a religion, just so they don't have to confront what will always be the truth. The physicist who made that pioneering discovery was Dr. Max Planck. It's the same Max Planck who in 1918 won the Nobel Prize in Physics as the father of quantum mechanics, and he was ever more certain about what he had found. In 1931, he said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." He said in 1944, quite literally, there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. That mind is the matrix of all matter. And Albert Einstein, we've all heard of him, he came to agree with Dr. Planck. He said, concerning matter, we have been all wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter, quoting Albert Einstein. Unfortunately, though, thanks to the short-sighted decision that was made by a few scientific bureaucrats close to a century ago, I'd remind you of that, we have a science that's now completely in the weeds and still refusing to understand the truth. Today, our guest for what is a wonderful 22nd time is our precious friend, Dr. R. Craig Hogan. Craig is a careful researcher and visionary, and he's someone who knows more about the science that actually underlies reality than I think does anybody else now living. Most researchers in the field of the afterlife choose one or a few areas of study to make a career of it. I mean, for example, deathbed visions or near-death experiences or whatever. But Craig is one of the very few who sought to understand from the beginning how it all fits together. And it does fit together. Craig's 2008 book is Your Eternal Self, and it's indispensable reading for anyone who wants to understand reality. Until I first read that book, I had all the pieces. I really did. I had spent decades doing the research, but I never could see how they fit together. Then I read Your Eternal Self. I reached out. I met Craig. We became friends. I picked his brain. And the following year, I wrote The Fun of Dying, and the rest of my life has unfolded. Craig Hogan is my personal guru, my inspiration, my precious friend. Welcome, Craig. I'm thrilled to have you with us.
Roberta, as you know, I'm thrilled to always be with you. So I'm looking forward to this. We have a great time together when we talk. So let's go.
I just want to add one more thing. It's important that people understand when I talk about consciousness, I'm not talking about anything that has to do with your brain. Consciousness, the base consciousness that manifests this universe, and of which each of our minds is an integral part, the consciousness that both Albert Einstein and Max Planck found, is the only thing that exists. And we're going to seek today to better understand how this base consciousness, of which we all are part, really functions in the modern world. And this is an area where Craig is really expert. Until enough people understand what we're going to talk about today, it is going to be impossible for humankind ever to improve anything on this planet. So, Craig, take it away. I think most people do know your story by now because you've been on so often, but maybe you could just tell them a little bit about how you came to write Your Eternal Self, which I could not possibly plug it more strongly. If you read any of my books and you get to the bibliographies, you always find this book first. How did you get started even on thinking about writing what is really an extraordinary book?
Yeah, that actually was late in life. It was after a half a century of my life. And I finally discovered at that time that I have psychic abilities. And I was given these gifts. I was given those abilities at that particular time in my life. In fact, I had a numerology that was done at that time, and what they said was that my life became entirely different, that I was actually, it was like I would die and be reborn. Everything was changed, and as a matter of fact, then what happened was I found out that I could hold cards in my hand, and I can see the face of the cards. I would know what was on the face of the cards. I would know what the color was, what the suit was, what the number was, by just holding them on the palm of my hand face down. And so then when I discovered that that was true, I also discovered that I have a remote viewing ability. I can sit someplace and somebody can tell me that there is a target, there's something that is on a table thousands of miles away, and I can close my eyes and look and I can describe what's on the table. So when I discovered I had these psychic abilities, I realized that the mind is not in the brain. The mind is not being influenced by the brain. Yeah, the mind is completely separate from the brain. We're having these mental functions, doing these mental things, and none of it is dependent upon the brain. So that means that when the brain goes away, the mind can just keep on going. And so then I discovered the afterlife and found out more about it, and then discovered that now we have roadmaps of the afterlife. I mean, we can just, it's like we can have tour guides. We know so much about the afterlife and now about afterlife communication. That's what we're focusing on now. So we're far beyond the nature of the afterlife, and we're talking about how do we communicate with people who are living there. It's just like picking up the phone and dialing them up. And so now we are in the process of expanding all of that research, and that's what AREI is doing. So AREI in the future is going to be doing more research and helping the people who are doing the research so that everybody can communicate, and eventually that will change humankind. So that's how I got into it. And then after that, I wrote the book, Your Eternal Self, in which I assembled all of the evidence that we have that the mind is not in the brain first, that our mental minds then influence reality. We change reality, and what the afterlife is like, and that we then will have this marvelous opportunity to transition into what will be the most wonderful part of our lives. And we want people to realize that, to understand that. And so I wrote Your Eternal Self with all the research. It has 306 different sources. And all of them are studies that have been done so that we can approach those who should understand, if they just open up their minds, the fact that the reality is much greater than we believe it to be, that the mental part is only a part of what reality is. And so that's why I wrote the book.
What Craig wrote is extraordinary because it is scholarly, but it's still easy to read. It'll take you longer than an evening, but you can read this one book and you can come out of it as if you've read, dozens of books, as if you've really done the research yourself. So I recommend it to everybody, and it's always top of the list in the books I recommend that people read who have read my books, so they can fill themselves in on what's really going on. So what is consciousness anyway, Craig? Can you describe it, what it is?
Sure. I think that we can look at what we're doing, what we believe, or what we experience, and we can say that's consciousness. So it's not that great complex thing that people try to make it out to be. It simply is what we experience. So there is nothing but mind and consciousness. Mind is the greater mind. It's the what we would call the divine, or the creative source, and then we are portions of that. Tom Campbell describes that as saying that we are individuated units of consciousness, and there's a big C, big consciousness that we're part of, but we're all part of the same consciousness. So the best way to think of this is that we are all dreaming the same dream together, and so we are experiencing the same experiences, but we're having them individually. Each one of us is having them. So we are having an experience of this world together. So in other words, if we're on the phone right now, we're talking to each other. There actually is no matter that's out there. And it isn't that there's matter and that we are on these phone lines or these transmission lines and that these transmissions are going across. What's happening is we're having the experience of that. We're having the experience of speaking to each other from our different locations, and that experience is in the mind, and it's in the greater mind, and it only seems like it's out there, or seems like it's substantial because of the fact that we're both having the same dream. And so we say, well, if we're talking on the phone and we're having this experience together, that means there must be something outside of us.
That's
and
right.
That's not what it is. That's not what it is. What it is in the mind, the big C consciousness, the divine consciousness or creative source. In the mind, the greater mind, we are having that same experience with each other. And that means that we then are creating the experiences. Our minds are creating the experiences. And we can have a different world. We can change the world to be what it is that we want it to be based upon the experiences that we're having as a species. And so we have disease, we have cruelty, we have the conflicts that we have as a result of what we do in our experiences as humankind, as a whole humankind. And we can change that. So we can live in a heaven on earth. And Yeshua Bar Yosef, the sage of Galilee, whose name was mistranslated Jesus, said that the kingdom of heaven is spread out upon the face of the earth, and men do not see it.
Yes.
And what that means is that we can be in heaven right now. This earth can be a heaven, but we have to change our consciousness.
Yes.
Every one of us has to change our consciousness, and when every one of us changes our consciousness, then that would change the consciousness of the world that we're creating with each other. So the basis of reality is consciousness. That's it.
And there's within consciousness, we're going to be talking about this with Craig in a few weeks. It's important to understand within consciousness, time does not exist. This has profound implications, which we'll be talking about next time he and I talk. One of them is that this universe is being continuously manifested. We can't say it was created. We can only say it exists right now, and it always exists in the now. And it actually bends your mind a little bit when you think about these things. Awareness, your personal awareness, is what you think of as you, is part of the awareness, which is all consciousness. When I went through the whole business with A Course in Miracles in Killing the Ego, which is a really terrible experience, but I recommend it to everybody because it works so well. What got me out of the funk was that my primary guide had me wake up one morning and know that I would never lose awareness. That was my fear. There has to be a fear that you kill. I was afraid I'd lose awareness, and he said, no, you will never lose awareness. You will have God's awareness. The more I think about that, the more I think it's profound, because your awareness is part of the awareness of God. And the more you advance spiritually, the more perfect that expanded that awareness is going to become. Talk about that, Craig. Talk about what the difference is between the two extremes of consciousness and how we can tell if we're in one or the other.
Yeah, because what we are living on the earth plane, and what we say when we're living on the earth plane, we are actually experiencing the vibration of what we call the earth plane. So that we are all in this dream together. We have agreed to be in it together, and so we experience it as it is right now. Now, while we're on in this dream, while we're having these experiences together, the experiences that we can have are at a very base level in which we're driven